Hello, good morning and good afternoon and good evening, everyone, and welcome to our session today. We'll just begin, and the other sisters will join us as we go along. So as we start, I'd like to ask if there's anyone who wants to do the opening invocation today before we begin. You can put your hand up, or you can unmute yourself and just begin. So if there's anyone who wants to volunteer. Herma, your mic is on. Do you want to do the opening invocation?
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Good evening, sisters. Good morning. I'm going to lead with a word of prayer. Let us pray. Everlasting Father, we come unto you this evening. We glorify your name and we honor you. For the whole week we are with our sisters. As we are going to start our session, be with us. At the end, we will glorify your name. I pray and believe. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Herma. And also just perhaps a small reflection from me is just to be grateful that we've been able to do the sessions, or we've been able to have the school until this time. We're almost to the end, and so for me it's just being grateful that we have been able to have the strength and the fortitude to make it to this time. And to all of you who've been able to join the classes and hear what our experts have come to teach us, but also for our experts for making time to come to be with us and to share their knowledge and the experience, and to answer our questions and listen to our comments and everything. And so I'm just again, I think it's been a season for gratitude for me. So today I'm grateful that we're able to do that. And so with that, I want to invite our dear Professor Elsa, who's going to be taking us through the first part of the session today. And we're going to be talking about how to, sorry, where is it? I forgot. I'm sorry, a workshop on how to submit human rights complaints on the UN. So Professor Elsa, welcome.
Thank you so much, Winnie, and thank you everybody for being here. Sisters, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I totally see what Winnie is saying, the fact that we managed to have this 10th session of the Global School and to have it over Zoom, because that's what we could do under the circumstances, is really amazing. And I have to say that I'm sure that you are all a little tired, I'm sure, but it's worthwhile. And I feel, when we end this seminar series, I miss it, and I miss you, because we become, we come close, we speak, like sisters, like human beings, like very frankly and freely in this context. So my dear friends, so today is about, it's like a little workshop about how to submit human rights complaints to the UN. And let me say the first thing, which is that for a long time, like for decades, after the Second World War, there were no complaints procedures for human rights that were internationally available. And why is that? Of course, we can imagine, because states don't like that, don't like for there to be avenues, through which individuals or groups, organizations can submit complaints. They don't like that. So that's why it took a long time. So I want to show you in one sheet I have prepared. I didn't send it to my FIMI friends, but I will send it so they can share it with all of you. So this is a paper, like on one page, right? That shows us, like on one page, the human rights system of the UN, okay? And you see that under, it has like one, two, three areas of work, right? The first is standard setting. It's what we have discussed, you know, how we formulate international law on a topic. For example, on indigenous peoples, we have the Declaration and we have the ILO Convention 169, or we have the Convention on the Rights of the Child, etc., etc. We have, in the human rights field, we have more than 100 human rights instruments, both treaties and declarations. And then we come, the second, the number two that you see here is monitoring. And that's what we're discussing today, monitoring. Monitoring is who monitors states' behavior, who monitors. Of course, the citizens, all of us monitor, but there have been established international mechanisms so that if we don't find justice at home when we try to pursue, you know, our justice for our human rights, we can go to another level, to the international level. And then the third area, since I am showing them to you in three, there are three. They are so-called the promotion of human rights policies, also technical cooperation. So for example, if a state, pushed also by its civil society, wants to establish, for example, a human rights commission or a commission on indigenous people's rights, or to create a new law on children's rights, etc. They might ask the advice of the United Nations, and we provide it. Okay, so in these areas, first of all, in standard setting, we have our declaration, the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, that is clear, right? That it's about indigenous peoples. And in monitoring, I'm going to talk about it, we have several possibilities. And in advisory services, we also have our own expert mechanism on indigenous people's rights under the Human Rights Council. Okay, so you can see this. I will now, after this, I will show you the bigger paper, which was distributed to you already. So under monitoring, I have an A and a B. Under A, we have the human rights treaties and the human rights treaty bodies that are monitoring bodies to which we can address complaints. And under little b here, you see, we have the various special rapporteurs and independent experts of the Human Rights Council, and that includes the UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And I put here at the very end the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, which has its hands and is developing possibilities in all these three areas, you know, in standard setting, in monitoring, and in technical advice. So let me stop sharing this, and I will go to our other paper. And I would like you, as I am talking, you can let me go there. Okay. 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 Share screen. All right. So I hope you can all see it. This was a paper that was distributed to you in English and Spanish Sometimes the links from the paper might not work fully, but I will demystify this so that you can see. I just wanted to say, dear friends, that the establishment of these monitoring procedures, which is how we have the carrot and the stick, right? So the carrot is, okay, we all say this is law on children's rights, we have a convention, wonderful, we're so happy about it. But the stick is the monitoring, is the watching on the part of international special bodies that have been established and procedures, and through us, our involvement as persons, as citizens, as people who live their lives, to stimulate and put into effect these mechanisms by submitting complaints if we need to do that. I also want to say that each one of these procedures that I'm going to be talking about now basically has been the result, dear friends, of the action and organization and strategy of civil society, of individuals and organizations, especially organizations, So I want you to know that these are our procedures, They have their formalistic, shape, cloak, but they are for us to use, for human beings to use. Okay. And as I am talking, if you have afterwards very specific, because it's a workshop here, very specific questions about a real situation, you can ask, here is a situation that we have that is this. To whom can we address this, or etc.? This should be very real and very interactive. Okay, so I'm going to be presenting to you 3 types of UN human rights complaints procedures, okay? And the first thing to know is that we must be aware, and we don't need to be lawyers for that, of what is the first thing to check before we decide to whom we submit a human rights complaint. And this is also a strategic question, my friends, because it takes effort, time, right? And you need to know what to expect. So we have to be strategic in how we submit and to whom we submit complaints. So I just wanted to say that it's strategic, For example, if you use the human rights treaty bodies, which will be my first part of the presentation, it might take longer to come out, their decision to come out, but the decision might have a more substantive, deep impact in the state where you live and where you have experienced this problem. On the other hand, if you submit it to one of the special rapporteurs of the Human Rights Council, it might be faster and you might save a life if that is the topic, the substance of your case. So let's go first to the complaints procedures under international human rights treaties. Okay, so there are 8 human rights treaties that have established human rights complaints procedures as possibilities. And each of these human rights treaties has a body, a human rights treaty body, that supervises how states implement that treaty. And so let's mention these treaties: Human Rights Committee under the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. We have the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination under the relevant treaty, the Committee Against Torture under the Convention Against Torture, the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, you know that well, the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disability under the relevant treaty, the Committee on Enforced Disappearances under the relevant treaty, the Committee on the Rights of the Child, and the Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. And under all these treaties, one can submit complaints, okay, from individuals or groups. There is one treaty and its treaty body, which is the Committee on Migrant Workers under the Convention on Migrants, where the individual complaints mechanism has not yet entered into force. So, but it is existing for all the others that we mentioned above. So, all right. So I'm going to, and I have highlighted the points in starting with the committee, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, adopted in 1965, but its various mechanisms did not kick in until the 70s. Okay, and you will see, and I want you to see, and therefore I'm simplifying and demystifying, how there are similarities in the approach among the various treaties. So in Article 14 of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, it says that the state party may at any time declare that it recognizes the competence of the committee to receive and consider communications from individuals or groups of individuals within its jurisdiction. So, in other words, all of these complaints procedures under the treaties, my friends, are optional to states. In other words, states might have ratified the treaty itself, but may have not accepted, for example, in this case, Article 14, which allows people to submit communications. Communications is a buzzword or a technical term for complaints, okay? Communications means complaint. Okay, so in order for us to be able to submit a complaint under the Convention Against Racial Discrimination, the state against which we want to submit the complaint must have, number one, ratified the convention itself, and secondly, must have accepted Article 14 to be activated, okay, so that complaints can be submitted. And in paragraph 2, it has this other famous requirement that is valid for all treaty bodies, that a person who submits a complaint must tell the story of how he or she has exhausted other available local remedies, exhausting remedies, national remedies. I go to Article 6, to paragraph 6 there, that says the identity, the committee deals with this confidentially and in closed meetings. Okay, but it says the identity of the individual or groups of individuals concerned shall not be revealed without his or their express consent. The committee shall not receive anonymous communications. In other words, on the one hand, you have to say who is submitting the complaint. It cannot be anonymous, but the name of the author of the complaint is not revealed in order to protect, the author from possible ramifications and bad action, negative action on the part of the state. And then it tells us under B, within 3 months, the state shall submit to the committee written explanations. Well, there is a dialogue, in other words, the committee sends the complaint and the state has a time frame within which within 3 months they have to come back and say what they have to say to support their actions. And then it says the committee under 7A, the committee shall not consider any communication from a petitioner unless it has ascertained that the petitioner has exhausted all available domestic remedies. Okay, we said it above. However, it says, this shall not be the rule where the application of the remedies is unreasonably prolonged. In other words, we would appreciate if you could kindly mute yourselves, dear participants, so we can, we can just be heard. Okay, so in other words, if you say that in my country, it's impossible. I have submitted a complaint and now it has been, my dear one, is detained and nobody has told me where they are, and many months have passed by. You don't need, you just say that and you tell the committee that it is impossible, to wait. You cannot wait and for years, for something like that. So the committee knows these things and they will decide, to discuss the issue, even though you have not gone to the Supreme Court of your country. I want to say that. Under B here, 7B, says the committee shall forward its suggestions and recommendations to the state party concerned and to the petitioner. Of course, it is a decision. Let me say something here. It's very important. These committees, dear friends, they are not international courts, but they are like courts. Okay, the way they formulate their opinions, their advice, right, on particular cases, they're formulated, and we have many lawyers in these committees, they're formulated like court decisions. However, their legal validity is not that of a court. It's not a mandatory, it's advisory. That's why you see under 7B, where it says the commission shall forward its suggestions and recommendations. It doesn't say decision for the reason I explained. However, the way it is received by the international system and by the authoritativeness of these human rights treaty bodies is like an international court decision. I wanted to make this, clarification. And then under 8, it tells us that the committee will include in its annual report to the General Assembly of the UN, by the way, a summary of these communications, and where appropriate, a summary of the explanations and statements of the states, and its own suggestions and its own decision on the case. So in other words, these cases are given broad publicity and to the high body, which is the General Assembly of the United Nations. So I wanted now immediately to come in and tell you that under these other 3 treaties, like the Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women, you have optional protocols that are added to these treaties that allow for individual complaints to be submitted. And for us to be able to submit complaints against these states have to also have ratified the relevant optional protocols. Now I go a little bit into the Convention Against Torture because it's one of the more recent ones, 1989. It includes things that we had, through practice, we had established through practice. It has articulated them, said them in black and white. So it says in Article 22, a state party to this convention may at any time declare under this article that it recognizes the competence of the committee to receive and consider communications from or on behalf of the individual subject to its jurisdiction. The same thing as the Convention Against Racial Discrimination we were reading before. And then in paragraph 2, the committee shall consider inadmissible any communication under this article, which is anonymous. Okay, same idea. Then we jump to 5, the committee shall not consider any communication from an individual under this article unless it has made sure that the same matter has not been and is not being examined under another procedure or international investigation or settlement. You know, that's very important. In other words, you cannot send the same case to, for example, the Committee Against Torture, and you are also submitting it to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights or to the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. So the secretariats of these bodies are in touch, you know. So in case somebody makes a mistake and does not know this and submits the same thing to 2 bodies, you know, it will stop. It will be stopped. In other words, it will be dealt with by the first body to which you sent your complaint. Under B here, you see the individual must have exhausted available domestic remedies. Same idea, right? In black and white. But it says that if it's unreasonably prolonged or is unlikely to bring effective relief to the person who is the victim, that is not valid. In other words, if you tell the committee, you explain, you know, that it is unreasonably long, etc., because justice delayed is justice denied, then the committee will look at your complaint case. And then under 6, you see it will be closed meetings, the same idea. In other words, this is a confidential procedure to protect, you know, the author and the victim, etc. And then we read in the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance that a request that a disappeared person should be sought and found may be submitted to the committee as a matter of urgency by relatives of the disappeared person or their legal representatives, their counsel, or any person authorized by them, as well as by any other person having a legitimate interest. Under C here, it says that it's important that it has already been presented to the relevant authorities of the state. In other words, you cannot not take any action nationally. You must do, again, as for the other treaties, you know, exhausting local remedies. You have to use the local remedies, the national remedies. And under E, you see the same idea. You must not have submitted it at the same time to another international complaints procedure. And then in Article 21, it says, the state party may at any time of ratification of this convention or afterwards declare that it recognizes the competence of the committee to receive and consider communications. Again, it is the communications or complaints procedure is integrated in the text of the treaty, but it requires a special declaration of the state because it's optional, what I was telling you before. And it's closed meetings. And under the Convention on Disabilities, we also have an optional protocol. It's not integrated. So now let me go to the very practical things as well. The Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights has a great website. I have put here the link to the website. And in this website, you will find which states have ratified the various human rights treaties and the optional protocols or articles that allow complaints to be submitted. This is the first thing that you have to do. Let me take the US as an example. The US has not accepted any complaints procedure under the human rights treaties it has ratified. This is just an example, okay? Other countries have accepted, especially Latin American countries have actually accepted most of them, most of the human rights complaints procedures. Under B, also in the website of the High Commissioner, you will see a model communication a model complaint, right? For the guidance of those who wish to submit complaints, right? For example, you will see a model form to submit complaints to the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. And under the optional protocol of the convention, you will see a model communication form for the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. And I have annexed one to this document. At the end of this document that we distributed to you, you see this form. It's a very useful form, even if you don't submit to these two bodies and you want to submit to another body, it's very useful for you. It just leads you through the things that you have to fill out. Under C here, you will find there are treasures in the website there of the High Commissioner. You will find a specific page devoted to the complaints procedures under the Human Rights Treaty bodies. And of course, the status of ratifications country by country. I have here put down, the address of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and a fax number for urgent matters, and an email where you can submit your petitions. Okay, so let me pause here for a second. If there are any questions you have on this part, and then I go to the second part, and that's it. If you feel like asking, you can raise a hand and Winnie will see it. Okay, we can
Anyone?
take
No, I can't. No, I can't see any hand.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
we can take a breath, because all this is one system, actually. There are different possibilities, but okay, so now I come to this other system, which is, shall I call it most popular? Because it seems to be easier. But let me say that the system I described above, first under treaty bodies, has been used very actively by Indigenous peoples. Okay, I just have to say, and Indigenous peoples have won big on several cases, in particular under the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Fantastic precedents we have on Indigenous people's rights, also under the Convention Against Racial Discrimination. Okay, now let me come to the so-called special procedures of the Human Rights Council, the special rapporteurs. Sometimes they call them independent experts, but it's synonyms. And again, you have on the website of the High Commissioner, you have a special pages devoted to these procedures. So what is the job of these special rapporteurs? By the way, we have, more than 40, something like 45 special rapporteurs. One of them is on Indigenous people's rights. And we have about 10, 12 country-specific special rapporteurs. In other words, there is tremendous possibility for civil society, for us as individuals and as organizations to communicate with them. If we communicate with them, what is their job? What are they doing? What they're doing is that they will create, a specialized letter with the specific case and send it to the government, asking them to take specific action. For example, we have the working group on arbitrary detention, for example, and you complain about that. And you say that your person, has been detained, and you give the facts, right? The dates, the names, everything. So they will send a letter saying that they ask, immediate response by the government and protection of this person's physical and other integrity and so on. And the government, might send a letter and say, we are taking action we didn't know about. might say, oh, no, this is nothing. This is this person, you know, is under our penal code. Might say some excuses, right? But it is very important, my friends, that the state knows that the UN knows about the case. And the case is going to become publicized in the next report that goes to the Human Rights Council. These reports go to the Human Rights Council 3 times a year because the council meets 3 times a year. So imagine the strength of this and the pressure on states. The second thing that these human rights special rapporteurs do is based again on your complaints, on your proposals also, they ask to visit a country, to do a country visit to do their monitoring work, to see what is happening. And of course, when they come to the country, they will also meet with civil society in a very big way. They organize their visits extremely well. And then they report, of course, to the Human Rights Council, and once a year, they report to the General Assembly of the United Nations. So on the website of the Office of the High Commissioner, you will find, you know, technical things like a questionnaire, how to submit information to these bodies. I have attached in the annex to this document you have in your hands these forms, you know, that lead you very easily. For example, what happened, where it happened, the names, what time it happened, who said what to whom. If people came to take your loved one from home during the night, what happened? All this you describe in your communication, and then you submit to, there is a link here that I have where you submit these communications. Another thing I want you to be also aware of, like for the treaty bodies, the people that are the authors of these complaints, but also the victims, there is a certain protection. For example, the names, again, the name of the author is not mentioned to the state in order to protect the author, you know, unless the author explicitly says, mention my name, the author's name is not mentioned. And also the names of the alleged victims are usually mentioned, but if by any chance you cannot mention the victim, but then it's also kind of difficult to, you know, to provide the protection on the part of the special rapporteur. You have to know who the victim is. And I have put here elements, you know, about, this is just copied from the website of the High Commissioner, where you see among the 45 special rapporteurs, our special rapporteur, Mr. Francisco Calizay, who is the rapporteur. You see the resolution that originally created this mandate. You see the email where you have to send Indigenous at ohchr.org. Something I want to flag, and it's important not just when you submit to Indigenous, for the Rapporteur on Indigenous Rights, but for all rapporteurs, that the information has to be credible. You don't have to submit a legal analysis yourself, but you know, by reading the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples or the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, you know, I mean, and that's why you thought of submitting a complaint. So you can say that that's what happened, the facts. In other words, it's very important to be factual and to be precise on this. You don't have to have very long explanation. 1-2 pages is enough, and you can put annexes. You can add annexes to your complaint, it says here. And, you know, in in the form that I attach, but also it makes sense when and where this happened, the community, the victim affected, what happened, the perpetrators, whatever you know about who they were, and any action taken by the state authorities, if any, and if you have submitted it to other international bodies, what action was taken by those bodies? Because remember that you cannot be submitting a case at the same time to two bodies. So these are details, but very important. And I repeat, you don't have to be a lawyer or an expert in complaints, to submit it. And here we mentioned here, what is the preferred method by the special rapporteur? This is the email that you submit your complaints. And last but not least, I will mention, I turn page and mention something that I would, if I were your expert advising you, I wouldn't submit it. It is a complaints procedure on regarding patterns of gross violations of human rights. This is a remnant of the very first and very shy complaints procedure that was created in the late 1960s, started functioning from 1970. But it is quite cumbersome. It has to go, first of all, it is about gross and systematic, about patterns of gross violations of human rights. Second, it goes through a very slow and cumbersome procedure of two bodies of the Human Rights Council. And thirdly, when the Human Rights Council thinks that indeed this is worthwhile, these bodies, they think is worthwhile to say that this country X, is a gross violator of human rights, this becomes is so we have, okay. So for this reason, you can read what I have highlighted here. There are various reasons that I think now in the human rights mechanisms, as a result of the human rights movements around the world, we have much more, how can I say, visible, publicly visible, and also quick human rights complaints procedure. So we don't need to necessarily use that. Finally, in the annex, I have put the model complaint form, which one can use easily. I'm not going to go through it. You can look at it and use it. So I will stop sharing, dear friends, and I'm available to you for any explanation of this practical and workshop style information. And also if you have any, specific like kind of case where you would like to know how to deal with it, I encourage you to spend 10 minutes, on the website of the High Commissioner. It really takes you by the hand also, tells you all this, what I was telling you, so that you are able to use it, to use this complaints procedure. So I pause here and
maybe we can take a question or a comment. If anyone has a question or a comment that you'd like to ask Professor Elsa on the complaints mechanisms. Well, as they're thinking about it, Professor, I was just wondering, since you said that the local remedies have to be exhausted first before your your case is taken into, into consideration, right? But in some instances, even the local remedies do not give you the time to do the complaint or to be able to seek justice locally. And so then, does it mean that, for instance, if it was my case and I went to the court in the country and I approached our violations through the national constitution, and that didn't work out, does it mean then that I need to go to the African court first before now moving up to the international procedures? Or can I go from the national straight to the international? Do I have to follow the national and then the regional and then the international, or is there a way to skip?
Yeah, you don't have to go to the regional. No. I mean, it is there because the regional is also international. But you can select if strategically you think, because now the African Court on Human and People's Rights issued its first positive decision on the Ogiek people in Kenya. Oh, that's good timing. And the African Court is very open to us. Maybe that's why I said at the very beginning, it's strategic decision where you go. And you are the best ones to know your country, your region, and also the international, if you cannot find justice in the country, in the region, so yeah, you don't have to go to the regional before you go to the global, to the UN.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Does anyone else have a question or a comment before we can conclude the session? All right, January, please go ahead.
Buenos días. Muchísimas gracias a la profe Elsa.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Professor Elsa, for sharing with us your so valuable knowledge. Professor Elsa, I just have a question, a doubt. For example, if a person presents a complaint, how long does it take to find a solution, to receive a solution, or perhaps we call it an answer about that case? That's my concern.
Very relevant question. First of all, I should say that some cases are super urgent because they involve the physical safety and integrity of a person or of a person's family and of a person's family, So it has to be urgent because you know it, that it's urgent. If a person has been taken away by the police in the middle of the night and nobody tells you where your loved one is, this is super urgent. You must submit your case immediately. It's a human thing. Now, if it is, for example, because we have a rapporteur on trafficking of women, right, of people, of women and girls, this might not be an emergency of the kind I just explained, of a disappeared person who was picked up in the middle of the night from his home. But it can be a person that you discovered was trafficked, or now you have some elements about these traffickers being protected by the state. Then the time frame is broader, Johnnery. The bodies of the UN, meaning especially the special rapporteurs, don't block you there. They don't block you on the time, because we all realize that for us to put together as family of the person, as an NGO that we are, whoever we are, it takes time to submit, to put all this together, this information together, and to send it to the UN body. So they don't, they are not too stiff about that. Let me assure you, Johnnery, because they are there to protect. Yeah.
All right.
Gracias, profesor.
There is John.
Thank you,
Yes.
Professor Elsa.
I don't see a hand. Can I say something else?
Yes, please go ahead.
I just wanted to tell you, my friends, that indigenous peoples have been using the human rights treaty bodies, as I said, with a lot of success. Very good precedents have been created by cases submitted both from Latin America and from the Sami people. The Sami submitted cases to the Human Rights Committee under the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights on purpose, trying to create positive precedent. For example, the committee has found that indigenous peoples, because their culture is linked to certain economic activities, for example, reindeer herding and other activities, these activities are are a fundamental obligation of the state to protect. This is very important and very positive for indigenous peoples to have as a decision of the Human Rights Committee. So I wanted to say that. And the second point I want to say is that sometimes you will see that your complaint, let's say, you're an indigenous person. Your complaint, of course, can be sent to the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. But if it is in order to protect a human rights advocate, an indigenous human rights advocate, you can also submit the same letter to the Special Rapporteur on human rights defenders. And if that person was also, for example, tortured, you can submit it to the Special Rapporteur against torture. So I'm just saying, I'm just giving you ideas of how creatively you can use the human rights the complaint system. For example, it's not uncommon for 3 special rapporteurs, 3, to submit one letter, one to the country, and signed by 3 rapporteurs, expressing their, concern and asking for specific action. So I wanted to add that, Winnie, because I had not said it before. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. We've come to the end of our session, so maybe if you have any closing remarks you want to give before we can conclude the session.
I want to give a remark that I am very excited these days because CEDAW, the Committee Against the Discrimination of Women, has now adopted the general recommendation 39 on Indigenous women, and I'm very inspired by it. And I think it creates for us, an opportunity. If you read the 24 pages of this recommendation, it's really inspirational because it helps us put in under certain, organize our advocacy and our cases, and address also the CEDAW in a very systematic way. So this is my final words, because it is something that is very, very much in my mind these very days, especially since the permanent forum starts on Monday, and there will be very special events, including on this topic. So thank you very much, sisters.
Thank you, Professor. Indeed, I think it's exciting to be able to see what this recommendation will do for Indigenous women and girls in terms of our advocacy. And I hope that the ladies here can be strategic, as you have said, in putting out complaints if they're able to, and taking everything that we've learned really and putting it into action in the work that we do. So I want to thank you, Professor Elsa, for being with us, for working with us from the beginning, not just of this edition, but from the very beginning of the Global School. We're very grateful for you, and we wish you well and good health, and we hope to meet you in person sometime soon. And we hope to also see you in the next edition of the Global School. And so thank you so much. And we want to give you this small token of appreciation from us, from the International Indigenous Women's Forum, Indigenous Women's Global Leadership School, in recognition to Professor Elsa for participation and contribution in the capacity building of Indigenous women, leaders from Africa, Asia, Latin America, North America, and the Pacific during this 10th edition of the Program on Human Rights and International Advocacy Skills. With gratitude, signed by Teresa. So thank you so much, Professor, and we hope to see you soon. All the best in everything that you do, and maybe some of us, if we are at the permanent forum, will be able to see you if you're there. And see you again in the next edition.
Thank you very much, and I will be at the forum. But I will stay with you while Pamela is presenting. So.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you so much. So I will pass the session over to Hortensia, who will take us through because our guest is here already.
Gracias, Winnie. Buenos días, buenas tardes, buenas
Thank you, Winnie. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you to everyone who is connected for our program. We will continue with our agenda. Now we have our following presenter. So it's a great pleasure to present Professor Pamela Caja. She is an associate professor for the Center of Latin American Studies at the University of
Pamela Calle is a
NYU, rather,
anthropologist engaged
at
with
New York
issues of gender,
University.
race, class,
She
and
will talk
state
to us
formation in
about
Latin America.
gender
She's currently a
movements,
clinical
as
associate
well as
professor at the
Indigenous
Center for
women
Latin
and their rights.
America
Professor Caja is a Bolivian
and Caribbean
anthropologist who has
Studies at
dedicated
New York
herself to
University.
studying issues of race in Latin America. She is currently a clinical
And she has
associate
received the
professor
Dr. Martin Luther
at
King
the
Faculty
Latin
Award
American and
in
Caribbean
2016,
Studies Center
2017
at
at the same
NYU. She
institution.
received the Martin Luther King
She co-created
recognition in the department in 2016-2017.
and
In that same
coordinated
institution, she was able to co-create and create a platform for feminist associations that is currently ongoing. And she's also worked on the working group for comparative racism as of 2016 until present day. She was a co-founder of the Racism Observatory in Bolivia in 2007-2017, as well as a network of anti-racism actions from 2010 until current day. This was an initiative launched by the Universidad Cordillera in Bolivia and the Long Institute at the Texas University. She also participated in the collaborative research process and contributed to books such as Black Resistance and Indigenous Resistance. She also contributed on several other works for fighting racism and fighting the patriarchy in Bolivia. She is also a co-editor. She has participated in various works and was a associate researcher for the state of Bolivia, participating in a project in 2017, as well as a UN development project and co-editor of Observing Racism and Regionalism in Bolivia. She participated in various different associations in the University of La Cordillera in Bolivia. Our next guest has quite some experience, so we give her a warm welcome and thank you again for accepting our invitation. Welcome, Professor Pamela. The floor is now yours, and you have about 1 hour to talk to us about your topic, and then we'll have some time for questions and answers. And of course, you can use the time however you'd like, however you see best. We'd also like to invite our participants, all of our leaders, to participate, to contribute to the conversation, to ask any questions, and make sure your comments are heard so that this moment can be interactive. So, welcome, Professor, and again, the session is yours.
Muchísimas
Thank
gracias.
you so much, Hortensia. Thank you, Elsa, for the invite. And thank you to FIMI for considering me for this type of event and these very important classes that have been provided after so many years. We see so much experience and it's quite significant. Thank you so much. So perhaps before I start with this session, I could share my screen.
Sí, sí, sí puede, por
¿Sí
favor.
puedo?
Ahí le van a apoyar, el equipo de FIMI
Yes,
le va.
yes, of course. You can go ahead. Our FIMI team will provide you some assistance. Thank you.
Aquí. No, no quería ese.
Well, I didn't want that screen. 1 second, I wanted this one.
Voy a salir otra vez.
1 second.
No encuentro mi Google Chrome.
I can't find my Google Chrome. I'm not sure why.
Pamela, si quieres enviarme por email.
Pamela, perhaps you can send it to me via email and I can share it.
No, yo creo que ya lo he encontrado, pero
No, I think I found it,
compartirlo.
but I'd like to share my screen. Okay, okay, here it is.
Solo quiero
Perfect.
tenerlo a mano para,
Well, I just want to have it
para
at hand,
para no equivocarme. Y voy
and
a
that way I
voy a
won't
empezar a
make
hablar
any
en
mistakes. Now I'll start my presentation in English.
Voy a empezar a hablar en inglés porque todo lo
So I'll
preparé
start
en
speaking
inglés.
in English because I prepared everything in
Yeah,
English.
I'm from Bolivia. I'm an anthropologist, a Chicana feminist activist. That's the way I show myself. I do work with Indigenous women in Bolivia, and I know Indigenous women all throughout the continent, and I'm very proud and happy about that. Yeah, I'm a professor at NYU with lots of impetus and pretensions sometimes to decolonize, depatriarchalize hegemonic feminism as well as anthropology. Here I want to explore with you ways in which my feminism has been environmentalized in a context and moment in history where the environmental movement is in many ways being indigenized. And I want to do this by sharing an experience of alliance building and collaboration between scholar activists and Indigenous and non-Indigenous women from the Americas. I also want to share a history of anti-extractivist struggle in Bolivia, its connections with Vivir Bien, living well, and anti-racism, and that experience that co-founding the Observatory of Racism in Bolivia, as well as the larger Americas network, is the base for that. And to show also the connection, to show how Indigenous women throughout the hemisphere have been key to the reconstruction of the communal environmental ecological fabric within the larger web of life. And I guess I want to go to show, yes, this, I want to explain what feminist constellations is, which is the platform I I and other women co-founded and worked on from 1913 on. And we sort of think of it as an agile participatory platform for weaving alliances and building solidarities among Indigenous, non-Indigenous, and Afro-descendant women across the Americas. And these platform components, this platform and its components have the following purposes: the affirmation of our multiple feminisms, the bridging of academic and activist spaces, the building alliances with activists, movements, and centers at the forefront of patriarchal, anti-colonial, anti-capitalist struggles across the Americas, the fostering of dialogues, and this is key, and hemispheric allyship and solidarity among Indigenous and Afro-descendant diaspora women, and last but not least, the collaboration in research action projects which expand knowledge of the current state of hemispheric social realities, resistant movements, and politics of care in which Indigenous women are involved in. So I guess I want to start sort of showing the program of feminist constellations and intercultural paradigms in the Americas. And I want to point out how in that first iteration, after years of having lived in the US and then going back to Bolivia, learning from Chicana and Black activism in this country, taking all that intersectionality conceptualization, simultaneity of oppression conceptualizations, going back to the Andean region was a very interesting, and it just molded my research and activist process in a very, very rich way. And I guess I wanted to sort of show you this as that the result of that. You know, we want to affirm our multiple feminisms, and we're going to invite Black and Indigenous women to this symposium, and women from middle classes from all over. And what we sort of ended up doing is talking about Indigenous feminisms hemispherically. And for that, we sort of invited a person from Guatemala, Irma Alicia Velázquez Nimatuj, and a person from Chile, America Millaray Painemal Morales. And their names are there. They're part of the program. And what I guess we sort of caught, I mean, the program is big and there were so many other things there, but what we learned there, how these women were already at the forefront and full force in the anti-extractive struggles in Guatemala as well as in Chile. And they were organizing against repression and resistance in their communities. So anti-extractivism became the way in which my feminism and my anti-racism started to get linked and articulated. So I thought that here I would talk to you a little bit about my sort of growing up within an extractivist context. So I was born and grew up at the center of extractive economy activity in my country, Bolivia. The name of the town
Entonces, el activismo en mi país, en Bolivia, era Ánimas y está en la parte sur de Potosí, en esta ciudad minera, como en otras ciudades mineras cercanas, que no existen o están poco ocupadas. Están en cooperativas, son cooperativas autónomas mineras, no son parte de la corporación de la compañía minera boliviana. Y fue un movimiento que desde principios de los 80, cuando hubo un ajuste estructural y neoliberalismo, y se cerraron minas y los mineros tuvieron que emigrar a Argentina, Brasil, Chapare, la región de Coco en Bolivia, en otras ciudades urbanas. Y ahora son ruinas del desarrollo de extracción, aunque antes apoyaba todo el... pero en estos lugares, estas zonas mineras han completado otro ciclo del extractismo. El testimonio de los barrios el testimonio de Damila Barrios en su libro
national mines after 1952 had continued exploiting in the mining working class, which was also partly indigenous. The book gave testimony to the way she and other miners' wives organized the Comité de Amas de Casa del Siglo XX, a committee that became part of a larger workers' movement, even though at the time it was seen as an appendage of it that did the double work of visibilizing the political and economic value of women and children's work and lives, and the value of their organizing strategies and time to contest status extractivism and affirming community life and the value of their work for social reproduction. By speaking about this publicly, she was able to give a concrete example of how the gender of primitive accumulation in Marxist terms was shaped in the Bolivian mines, and how this subsidized the extractive scaffold that produced profit for the few, while the miners as a class were barely able to socially reproduce their workforce. In the same book, she talks about her participation in the International Women's Conference sponsored by the UN in 1975, and she became one of the few voices from the popular sectors of Latin American society who destabilized the category woman, pointing to issues of gender difference in terms of class. It was only later and throughout the 80s and the 90s that the issue of equality and difference, because of this participation and the pointing out the difference amongst women, the issue of equality and difference became part of our feminist debate full force, and which led also to the discussion of ethnicity, race, class, and gender in relation to conceptual tools such as I said before, such as intersectionality and simultaneity of oppressions that came from Black feminisms and Chicana feminisms here in this country. What she mentions, Domitila, but does not focus on, is how mining towns depended on the work of peasant indigenous who, after the agrarian reform of 1952, had produced food on what was left of the hacienda system in individual parcels or in collectively owned land as part of Andean indigenous ILU systems, depending on the region and how people made the agrarian reform work for them. That work, however, has also historically been invisibilized and not remunerated, considered sub-work or informal work, because it is not waged. The connection of class and ethnicity, the two eyes, one of class and one of ethnicity, is only given a glimpse in her testimony, in Domitila Barrios' testimony, along with her almost strictly gender and class perspective in terms of production, and given the historical context of state extractivism and welfarism. Miners were immersed at the time And she does not visualize other forms of living beyond extractivism, even though indigenous communities in many regions of Potosi and other mining zones were surrounded by ayu, communal organizations, where the notion of vivir bien or buen vivir or living well originates, is created historically. Vivir bien is a notion that comes out of an intricate process of indigenous movement resurgence and practice throughout the hemisphere. It emerges as a more prominent construction based on a complex history of power struggles after the collapse of extractivism statism. In Bolivia, specifically in 1986, that lived off the exploitation of miners, the expropriation of the work of their wives and families also, the expropriation of what was considered subwork of indigenous peasants, but also of the expropriation of what nature's energies produced. Racial and patriarchal capitalism free-rided on both care and nature, on the work of men and women who could hardly make ends meet and reproduce socially, and on nature's labor, as I said, energies. And this is very important to our thinking nature and care together. Living well, therefore, or vivir bien, was constitutionalized in Bolivia in 2010, 4 years after Evo Morales became the first indigenous president. We saw the constitutionalization of the principle of buen vivir as an antidote to entrenched racisms and patriarchality, the patriarchality that Domitila had started to analyze and denounce decades before. Racial and patriarchal capitalism had historically tried to bury, hide, and or erase other forms of life, other forms of community life, other ways of being, otherwise worlds that had little to do with the accumulation of capital for profit making. The buen vivir alluded also to other forms of being in other forms of dispersed territoriality and autonomous governance historically. In Bolivia, ayu organizations and governance in the Andean region, but also in the lowlands, and in contemporary times, visibilized by, by the movement itself, by the indigenous, the slow resurgence of the indigenous movement itself. This principle then was historically practiced in communities, was historically conceived, practiced, created, and is also a way. And the other day I was talking to a woman, a Parayaku woman from the Amazonia, and we were talking to her, and she mentioned the word experimentation. It's also the creation of the conditions for experimenting, exploring what could be that otherwise world in terms of anti-extractivism or extractive development. And as explained before, it was in 2003 that the feminist constellations had started. And I'm going to go back to the, sorry, to that. As I said, the Guatemala and Chilean indigenous women who were there, they had started to denounce another wave of the expansion of the extractivist frontier in their countries, mining and forest multinationals respectively, in cahoots with the state, of course. The hollowing of the rights frame in these neoliberal states led to the criminalization of indigenous movements, accompanied by the imprisonment and assassination of local community leaders. By 2014, a group of indigenous women from Bolivia's Andean and Amazonian region came to New York City to the UN climate change meeting, and in a panel organized by by the Feminist Constellations platform, they discussed the pitfalls of free, prior, informed consultation, an instrument provided by the UN, and the Bolivian Constitution's provision on indigenous autonomies. They used the platform to make public to an international audience that such instrument and provision were not being respected by the plurinational state, despite its decolonizing and depatriarchalizing rhetoric, but especially despite its constitutionalized principle of buen vivir, living well. Thus, they were denouncing the hollowing out of the meaning and practice of rights-based agreements with the indigenous plurinational state in Bolivia. Here, the criminalization of indigenous movements that followed came accompanied by another strategy of co-optation, the creation of parallel official social organization supported by the government, leaving the unofficial ones, the creation of unofficial organizations, unauthorized, and the indigenous movement as a whole divided. In 2018, 2019, that period was a time of recalibration. The commodity boom instantiated by China's economic dynamic that benefited the countries considered part of the pink tide, Brazil, Bolivia, Argentina, Ecuador, and Venezuela, had ended. The prices of minerals, gas, and petroleum came to an unprecedented low. And in Bolivia, where the buen vivir had been constitutionalized, it slowly turned into a branding strategy for international consumption. Internally to the country, an extractivist model continued to be imposed, and this time intensifying the expansion of the extractive frontier more into indigenous territories. The indigenous women who continued coming to the UN, to the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, continued denouncing the plurinational state for not implementing the consulta previa libre e informada and the lack of implementation of the indigenous autonomy provision of the Bolivian Constitution. So by 2019, movements all throughout Latin America were being forged. By 2019, Ecuador, Chile, Colombia, and Bolivia were going through major uprisings. Governance strategies were failing throughout the region. In Bolivia, Evo Morales had to renounce the presidency after a turmoilish electoral and societal confrontation and polarization process that has not yet ended. As a feminist platform, therefore, recalibrating our analysis involved, especially in the cases of Bolivia and Ecuador, recognizing that to maintain the level of consumerism created during the commodity boom, the intensification of the expansion of the extractive frontier at a national level depended on a univocal and centralized state scaffold, a macho populism, and a plurinational identity politics hollowed out of the rights frame in which it was initially immersed. Going to another context, in Canada, we found out that indigenous women were disappearing and being killed. Man camps were built in their territories due to expansion of the extracting frontier towards First Nations territory and state deregulation. The expansion of the extractive frontier also involved that these same or similarly operated multinational companies in agreement with the states in question were entering indigenous territories in countries like Guatemala. There we learned that the history and geography of genocide converged with extractive sacrificial zones where indigenous people were being doubly devalued and turned disposable. Gender and racial logics intersected even more profoundly in processes of disposability and devaluation of indigenous women, where the number of feminicide cases were also rampant. Neoliberalism, we realized, had reached a fascist stage hemispherically. In our second Feminist Constellation Symposium, and I want to show the program here, the leaflet. We called it Feminist Constellations, Daughters of Mother Earth, Extractivism, and the Feminization of Repression and Resistance. There we deepened our exploration of this stage of extractive patriarchal racial capitalism and how it was imposing a politics of death on bodies of Indigenous women, but not only. I want to shift to the program. Sorry. This is the Feminist Constellation 2, Daughters of Mother Earth. And this is the program where at the beginning, I guess I would like to explain sort of how we organized these two symposiums, Feminist Constellation symposiums, that involved panels, like more like larger panels where women would express what they needed to express according to their organizing process and analyzing processes. And then those panels would break into smaller groups, working groups, where the idea is that into those smaller groups, an intimate space of interaction, a more more intimate, but at the same time, a smaller sort of ways of analyzing would not be detached from a politics of affect and care. No, we saw ourselves, therefore, in the constellation. Organizing this symposium involves seeing ourselves in the constellation of our co-resistance, as was clearly stated by Leanne Simpson from Canada, Indigenous woman from Canada. To do this, we were able to conceptualize and construct our symposium with a politics of care that would facilitate the dialogue between memory and knowledge protectors, water and air protectors, and body territory protectors. I need to explain the politics of care inside the words protectors and defenders vis-a-vis the onslaught of contemporary land and knowledge enclosures, land grabs and knowledge grabs, time grabs, and of the cheapening and devaluing the work of working people, women, children, men, elderly, in sacrificial zones. In other words, as protectors and defenders putting in practice a daily politics of care, Indigenous women like Berta Cáceres and so many others and their allies slow down patriarchal and racial capitalism in its ecological and social reproduction contradictions. Both contradictions destabilize, erode the ecological fabric and the social fabric of communities and territories. Both contradictions are interconnected. Capitalism, as I stated before, free rides on nature's labor and energies and environment making because it is treated as illimited in resources. It is never replenished, always extracted, always cheapened and devalued. It also free rides on all the social reproductive work mainly done by women, but not only, where cheapening and devaluing is ongoing and it takes place in territories, rural as well as urban. In the Symposium of Mother Earth, the dialogue between the women who had co-constructed the basis for the genocide indictment against dictator Rios Montt and the women who had co-led the resistance against the Dakota Access Pipeline in Standing Rock brought into the discussion during the panel and the working groups a politics of care that included that politics of affect, of intimate solidarity, and strategic exchanges to build more long-lasting alliances. And here I really want to show the clip of the indictment, first of the indictment of Rios Montt in Guatemala, to give you a sense of the process, the intricate process of what went on there then. And then after that, I will also share with you the trailer of the movie, The End of the Line, The Women of Standing Rock, and to give you a sense of what was explained by these women who were in Feminist Constellations 2 symposium, and sort of then discuss what came out of it.
Rodríguez, Cecilia Vaca Gallego, Ana Matón y Juana Hernández demuestran que fueron violadas sexualmente por soldados del ejército, siendo evidente el dolor que todavía experimentan al recordar los hechos, pues se utilizó violencia física y psicológica utilizada en contra de ellas al ser abusadas sexualmente. buscando romper con la figura de la mujer porque es portadora de vida, la que transmite los valores de la comunidad, la que da los conocimientos básicos para la vida, siendo admirable para los jueces la forma en que los ixchiles han defendido su identidad cultural, aún en medio de la adversidad. La declaración e informe rendidos por la perito Marta Casau Zarzú da los insumos para comprender la diferencia conceptual de los términos discriminación y genocidio, permitiendo conocer los antecedentes históricos y sociológicos referentes al racismo, desde el siglo XVI al siglo XXI.
Cuando yo les pregunto a la élite económica y política qué hay que hacer para integrar el pueblo indígena a la nación, la respuesta de un 10% ya es muy interesante porque plantean que hay que exterminarlos.
Ustedes son los rebeldes. A ustedes les están llamando rebeldes. Y yo públicamente les digo, no voy a descansar hasta verlos procesados, despojados de esa inmunidad y de esa ínfula de superjueces que tienen, pero no son superiores a la ley. Se los digo.
Recuerdo por el respeto que todos como personas, como seres humanos nos merecemos y sobre todo por el actuar profesional que debemos de tener de acuerdo con el Código de Ética Profesional. Todos como seres humanos tenemos respeto a nuestra dignidad como personas. Y desde luego, si somos abogados, tenemos que hacer acatamiento de estas normas.
Me parece que las audiencias del debate, o por lo menos esta del día de hoy, no puede ventilarse, porque esto pertenece a otro juzgado, a otro tribunal, a otro órgano jurisdiccional. Nos ponemos de pie y abandonamos esta sala.
Abogados, no se deja salir, no se deja salir, no se deja salir, no se deja salir, se ordena que regresen. Tribunal, ordena silencio, silencio en la sala. Los juzgadores consideramos que el acusado José Efraín Ríos Montt tuvo conocimiento de todo lo que estaba ocurriendo y no lo detuvo, a pesar de tener el poder para evitar su perpetración. Además de estar enterado de la existencia e implementación de los planes Victoria 82, Firmeza 83 y Operación Sofía, los cuales autorizó, en los cuales claramente se indica en qué debe efectuarse el control de la población y eliminar al enemigo interno, siendo claro al indicar que no se pueden implementar planes sin la autorización del comandante general del ejército, además de existir responsabilidad de mando, pues el comandante general del ejército es la máxima autoridad y quien ejerce el mando.
No hay represión de parte del ejército. El valor nuestro está en nuestra capacidad de poder responder a las acciones de mando. Eso es lo más importante. El ejército está en capacidad de reaccionar, porque si yo no puedo controlar al ejército, entonces ¿qué estoy haciendo?
Creemos firmemente que al reconocer la verdad ayuda a sanar las heridas del pasado y la aplicación de la justicia es un derecho que asiste a las víctimas, el cual también contribuye a fortalecer el Estado de Derecho en nuestro país.
Aquí ha pasado más de 90, más de 100 testigos que hablaron sobre las barbaries que se cometieron contra el pueblo ixil, pero no es solo contra el pueblo ixil, esto lo vivió todos los pueblos de nuestro país. Hoy tenemos la oportunidad en nuestro país de juzgar el primer genocidio en 500 años. Por lo tanto, nosotros lo que estamos solicitando es que se condene a los acusados por los delitos de genocidio y de violencia contra la humanidad. Muchas gracias.
Nunca autoricé, nunca firmé, nunca propuse, nunca ordené que se atentara contra una raza, una etnia o una religión. Nunca lo hice. Y de todo lo que han dicho, no ha habido ninguna prueba que evidencie mi participación.
Aunque vinieron a decir aquí que no son responsables, son mentiras. Yo lo vi con mis propias vistas. Sin embargo, el ejército sí fue terrorista porque cometió genocidio, deberes contra la humanidad. Estamos buscando una paz verdadera, con justicia, con respeto, con igualdad, con dignidad.
Por las razones expuestas, los juzgadores consideramos que la conducta del acusado José Efraín Ríos Montt encuadra en el delito de genocidio, por lo que debe imponerse la pena correspondiente. De la pena a imponer, el artículo 376 del Código Penal establece el delito de genocidio, contemplando la pena de 30 a 50 años de prisión. Dentro de ese parámetro, los juzgadores hemos optado por imponer la pena de 50 años de prisión inconmutables. Permítanme, por favor. En relación al mínimo y máximo de la pena para los delitos contra los deberes de humanidad, el artículo 378 del Código Penal establece la pena de 20 a 30 años de prisión. Dentro de ese parámetro optamos por imponer la pena de 30 años de prisión inconmutable. Es incomprensible que el acusado, teniendo conocimiento, el poder y la capacidad para ordenar al ejército bajo su mando, permitiera que se masacrara a la población civil del grupo étnico Ixil, que en su mayor parte se dedicaba a la agricultura. Aparte de lo indicado, los juzgadores tenemos que expresar que el reconocimiento del delito de genocidio afecta a todos los guatemaltecos, porque además de producir daño a las víctimas en forma concreta y a sus familias, también ha dañado el tejido social de los guatemaltecos. Haciendo conciencia que este tipo de hechos no deben de volver a repetirse, porque el pueblo de Guatemala desea vivir en paz, reconociendo nuestra identidad, nuestra riqueza pluricultural, multilingüe y el respeto a la libre expresión de nuestras ideas. No queremos que hechos de esta naturaleza vuelvan a repetirse. Creemos en realidad que para que exista paz en Guatemala debe existir previamente justicia. Y se ordena la inmediata detención con el fin de asegurar el resultado del proceso y por la naturaleza de los delitos cometidos por los cuales ha sido condenado, ordenando su ingreso directamente a prisión.
Thank you for watching. This is very powerful. And this is the basis of what the women in the feminist constellations, two daughters of Mother Earth, were discussing when they were, with the title of the panel was Memory and Knowledge Protectors, a memory of that process that led to the indictment, and the knowledge created within that in terms of resistance and repression. And I want to share now the end of the line, The Women of Standing Rock. It's just a trailer, but it gives you an idea of what had happened there, and the role of women, Indigenous women, in organizing that process.
And I was at a point where I felt like nobody cared. We're just people from here that stood up and asked everybody to come and stand with us. And they did.
Criminals! By the criminals! The original pipeline was to go through North Dakota, but it was going through white people's land. So they redirected it, put it through the Indians.
What it all comes down to is wanting clean drinking water for our children.
One family. If we don't stand, who will?
And we're peaceful, prayerful people, but it's come to a point now where enough is enough.
Love is the strongest.
The world is run by corporations now. Who's kidding who? Democracy.
Prayers would not be needed. Indigenous wisdom unheeded and sacred things depleted.
Are you telling the dogs to bite the protesters?
What is the fossil fuel? Continued destruction, nothing new.
I hear the rubber bullet. I see this one just coming straight for my eye.
Taking our children, shifting their feelings till nothing's true.
How many people know that the United States didn't allow us to raise our own families? We won that right in 1985.
They just put the fear in us so bad with hell and with that belt and with abuse. They'd come after you at night and take you someplace and made you do things you didn't want to do. And you thought it was your fault.
So when people ask, why is this the end of the line? Why are women standing up and saying, no, this is it?
Water is life!
It's because they've seen this happen to their children before.
We're disconnected, these times are hectic and feeling.
The earth is not something we pollute, we take advantage of, that we rape. The earth is our mother.
That's why we walk with prayer. And if that wasn't true, we wouldn't be standing here.
Nobody thought any politician would have the guts. And I just closed my eyes and said, do it.
We're still going to pursue the legal avenues. I have to leave a footprint.
People, hold your ground. Change is coming now.
The rhetoric is over. It's time for action.
So, yeah, those two experiences, the first day of that symposium were impacting. And in the morning, it was memory protectors in the Guatemalan case, where Indigenous and non-Indigenous women participated in the panel. And in the afternoon, the panel was called Water Protectors in Standing Rock. So both experience and organizational practice challenged core issues, according to us. Historical land and knowledge enclosures, alluding to the waves of expansion of extractive frontier within the US as empire and beyond the US in Guatemala, where primitive accumulation of capital keeps on taking place historically and robbing people, just making profit. Both experiences of Indigenous women and their allies were organizing and analyzing against the backdrop of historical and contemporary genocide against Indigenous peoples. Both experiences speak of collective rituals linked to democratic processes through long periods of time, like building a non-hierarchical scaffold for action and analysis to take place. Both experiences bring to the fore art, books, film that created visual narratives and documentation that visualized the work of organizing, the affective work, the care work that made possible the indictment in the case of Guatemala, and the intricate organizational work against the pipeline in Standing Rock. In the event itself, we had started with a ritual and ended up with ritual and poetry. This ending ritual included Native American drummers and the signing of a Defend Mother Earth Treaty Compact, a treaty that keeps on being signed by more and more Indigenous women from the North and the South, alluding to the hemispheric struggle of Indigenous peoples. All this made us think and feel spiritual connections of the daughters as with Mother Earth. And there's a blog that students participated in, and I want to share these parts of the blog and what students wrote in that blog to show the process in which this, what Leanne Simpson calls the constellations of co-resistance. And there she goes. This is Bethany Antelius, one of our Clark's NYU students. The connection between genocide, feminicide, and extractivism from an analytical point of view was evident throughout the conference. What was also evident was the connection between spirituality, embodiment, and resistance, the deep connectivity with the Mother Earth, with nature, with the dead, and our own female bodies, with all of these energies, was a foundational concept, a fertile backdrop in which these challenging conversations could take place, and from which strength for recounting and resistance could take place. Another student, referring to the Standing Rock organizing experience, he said many things, but what I chose to read is the following. I have to admit, while I had seen images from Standing Rock, I did not know the extent to which the counter response to Indigenous land protests in the United States was militarized. And I would be interested to explore the extent to which informal, paramilitary style groups, especially by ranchers in these areas like the Bundys, has worked side by side or facilitated the reaction by the government. It is clear that the government still views Indigenous communities throughout the country as non-citizens in the way that they respond to peaceful protests with the same weaponized response that they use abroad. And for us, for me, both experiences, the genocide indictment against Rios Montt and Standing Rock, as I mentioned before, widen the horizons of political imagination and social transformation in our struggles. And it is there that we find more Indigenous women throughout the hemisphere in constant movement, in constant contradiction, and in constant struggle to surmount those contradictions. But that's feeling and moving within contradictions, align, resolving those contradictions and finding new ones. I think that's the way, that's what Indigenous women in their organizations are doing right now. For this, I think I can go back to the program and to sort of to go to Daughters of Mother Earth Symposium and delve into what we called also later in the second day, body territory protectors against the militarization, technologization, and displacement that Indigenous peoples are experiencing in this fascist stage of neoliberalism. And as we noted before, in the Canadian example, planting man camps in Indigenous territories in order to extract has involved the killing of Indigenous women. Here and in countries like Guatemala, the reality of feminicide based on the impunity lingering from genocidal processes has its historical roots on what Rita Segato, an Argentinian anthropologist, denominates dueñidad, like this feeling of ownership linked to a pedagogy of cruelty. Dueñidad, this feeling of ownership involves ownership of bodies and of nature. Such notion takes us to discuss how the imposition of dueñidad, of the seigneurial state over the underground resources of a national territory makes the pact with extractive transnational corporations more effective. This sense of dueñidad is also such practice and attitude that takes us to cruel forms of gender violence and feminicide, especially where the backdrop is genocide. When listening to the women water protectors who had led the resistance against the Dakota Access Pipeline, a political ecology of the protection of water and its multiple voices and experiences all throughout the planet, starting in the Cochabamba water war up to Standing Rock, had begun to talk about what Maristela Svampa calls a praxis and reflection of body as territory. But going beyond Maristela Svampa, Leanne Simpson, I want to focus on Lorena Cabnal of the Red Ancestral de Sanadoras del Feminismo Comunitario, CAT, which is a term in Maya Quiché, who introduced this notion of cuerpo territorio as a way to connect different forms of patriarchal, colonial, and extractive violence. At the same time, the defense of cuerpos and territories opened the space for collective healing in order to break with the colonial and patriarchal paradigm in the capital expansion of the extractive frontier. This leads me to talk about complex territories, but also complex selves of the women in this case, and also the men, of course, of the children, all those who are forging, constructing territory and vivir bien in their locations, to this notion of territorios internos, más internos, internal territories in these notions of complex selves. We can also say that if Indigenous women are the central node of the eco-territorial communal fabric, and as such, part of the web of life where interdependence is created between humans and non-humans in nature, the chances that they can help slow down the intensity of knowledge extraction, emotional extraction, and physical extraction of natural resources becomes clear. Moreover, any violence inflicted on their bodies, on women's indigenous bodies, is a violence inflicted on other beings, human and non-human, who are part of territory, and vice versa. In a political ecology of water, then, the notion of cuerpo territorio, well, before that, I wanted to say that this becomes important for environmental feminists and indigenous movements alike, especially when thinking territoriality in relation to plurinationality, the state, and democracy. Those are very important connections. In a political ecology of water, the notion of cuerpo territorio as part of eco-territorial feminisms helps connect defense of water as part of struggles to defend Mother Earth's rights. Within this frame, movements can push against the privatization and commodification of water and propose first that water, as it has happened, is a human right. It's not a commodity. And that water, later on, water has rights because it is part of Mother Earth and it is a living entity like la selva viviente of the Amazonia. This selva viviente involves a politics of care and affect that makes to conceive of the selva as a living entity. And it is a way to shape debates about the deepening of democracy and plurinationality in this case. These are the elements that feed into debates of democracy about the environment, about communities, about nations, about nation states, indigenous peoples. And I don't know how much time we have. I think it's 12. I have spoken an hour, but I don't want to continue talking by myself. I just want to say that I had more clips about feminist constellations, two Daughters of Mother Earth, where we started to talk about body territory in a deeper sense in terms of involving care and nature. And I also wanted to talk about what happened in Chile, where where we find care, indigeneity, and nature as interconnected in the final draft of the constitution that they drafted. And that constitution was going to replace the dictatorial constitution of the 1980s, 70s and 80s. This new constitution was rejected, as the indictment against Rios Montt was overturned after 3 days of having done the indictment. 3 days had passed and it was revoked. And so, and then Standing Rock is also, the pipeline is being built at this moment. The organizational process could not stop that. But what I want to say about the three examples, I don't have enough time to talk about the Chilean example, where this constitution, I say in some parts of it, is considered an ecological constitution. La igualdad sustantiva de los seres humanos y su relación indisoluble con la naturaleza. Los pueblos son interdependientes con la naturaleza y forman con ella un conjunto inseparable. El Estado reconoce y promueve el buen vivir.
The state recognizes and promotes good living as a relationship between people, nature, and civil society organization. This is the founding principle.
Part of that constitution. And even though the constitution that took such effort to construct, the indictment that took such historical effort to push and be able to indict, and the organization process, horizontal organization process that went on in Standing Rock, that brought all kinds of people to that location and was able for a moment also to stop the building of the pipeline, are not wasted processes, wasted events. What I want to say here is that, and I said it before, that these moments in Indigenous peoples' organizations and Indigenous women's processes of organizing and fighting these extractive, racial, patriarchal, capitalist processes, these moments are openers, as I always say, of horizons. These experiences widen the horizon of political organizing and of social transformation. And that's the importance of these moments. And I wanted to end with that, saying that not only Indigenous women slowed down the force of this extractive politics of death, but I want to also say that there's a politics of life being constructed in the day-to-day lives of Indigenous women, in this case, in their own communities, their organizations, and in their countries. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for listening. And I guess we now pass to the process of just dialoguing about what I just said. I'm going to stop sharing.
Gracias, Profesora Pamela.
Thank you, Professor Pamela. Thank you for sharing all of these experiences of the struggles of Indigenous women in different countries. Now we would like to invite all of the participants, all of our leaders from different countries to share your comments and your questions so that we can make the most of Professor Pamela's participation. We have about 30 minutes for this space. We hope to have enough participation.
I'm ready. It can also be comments, not only questions, ¿no? Y puede ser comentarios, no solo.
¿Quién se anima a tomar la palabra?
Who feels ready to take the floor?
Medalit.
Medalis, welcome. You have the microphone. Yes, thank you, sister. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'd like to ask our professor today a question. What perspective do you have now with the role of being a feminist across the countries? You know, in addition to being Indigenous women, we've seen a large number of women who globally are opting to be feminists. What I've seen, for example, is that in other countries, and well, I'll provide an example. If I'm not mistaken, it was in Spain. In Spain, women went out to protest, particularly feminists. And what happened? Well, they started painting touristic spaces. They started to paint, I don't know, maybe a monument of the city itself. And there was this report shared where there was cleaning service staff. They were women as well. And everything on the floor had writing on it. So what happened? The government, maybe the mayor there, sent these women to go clean those spaces. So I think that we also need to think about how we are acting test, because on the one side, we are defending women, but indirectly, we are also impacting them. And they themselves were commenting and asking, why do we have to clean the writings of those who are supposedly defending women? And they have us here with our brooms, and if it doesn't come out, we have to get it out some way because the government has asked us to do it. So I'd like to know what your opinion is in regards to that. Thank you. Okay, regarding who cleans what other people do, well, that question is very important. And in that regard, I think that in the continent and in other locations, such as in Spain, the feminine struggles have had contradictions. And I think that in Latin America, we've also seen that there's more hegemonic feminist movements that are middle class and have varying access to resources and the state. And we see different types of feminism that are created by women or people that have more resources and people that at home can have someone to clean while they're out carrying out activist activities outside of the home. So what you've explained in terms of cleaning something done by other women, that is a very central topic to the more hegemonic feminist movements and the more popular movements.
So I'm in complete agreement with you in that sense. It is really impactful. On the other hand, I feel that there are different kinds of feminisms with different stories, with different genealogies. I had mentioned Lorena Cardinal during my presentation at the end, and I explained a little bit of the ways in which this notion that she presented, and given the experience of her collective, the Indigenous women, and how close they are to the realities of Indigenous women, having gone through so much violence throughout the genocide that they had suffered. The collective was talking about the body as territory. And if they attacked the territory, they attacked the body as well. If they attacked the body, they attacked the territory as well. Because a woman's body is connected to other bodies, non-human bodies with nature, right? So in that sense, she talks, for example, about a community feminism that arises from there, from that experience, her experience with Indigenous women in Guatemala. So in that process, when the peace agreements were signed and when people united again, regrouped again after the genocide, and how difficult it was, because after the peace accords, which were not really peace accords, there was a space for multinationals to come in again to ask for license from the governments who are allied with the companies to come into the territories and inflict violence on the territories and bodies. So what we do during these symposiums that we have organized and during this platform, it's exactly to talk about the multi-feminisms. That community feminism that Lorena Comunal talks about is not the same feminism that you are talking about in Spain, for example. So I would highlight that difference, and I would say again, as we say in this platform, Constelaciones Feministas, to reaffirm the multiple feminisms, acknowledge the diverse feminisms and our own histories as Indigenous women or non-Indigenous women, and how we create alliances within those feminisms. And what you are mentioning about who cleans whose house to be able to do other things, that is a very important issue. Thank you for your question. Yes, and me again. Okay, after you, we have Anima. But go ahead and ask your question, and then we'll go to Anima. It's a comment. I talk a lot about feminism because I also want to learn and I want to train as a feminist. So I always like to learn about perspectives and concepts about feminism. What happened? Something really sad that takes us to reflect. And this case happened right here in our Puno region. And it's about violence against women. What happened was that a nurse was raped. Her own work colleagues from the same center where she was working at. And not happy with just raping her, they have done something terrifying with her. because they damaged, that they injured her digestive parts, colon, rectum, and female body. And they have told us that she went into a coma and passed away, unfortunately, because she was not strong enough to go through a surgery. We as women, with so many organizations, women organizations, and they're also feminists in Peru, what strategies could we use so that these atrocities can no longer happen against us? It looks like we're hated because the magnitude of the desire to hurt her and kill her. And they're professionals, actually. So what professionals are we forming, training? How can we work for our rights? And I am also a healthcare worker. What we ask right now is for life without parole for the rapists. But with these laws and the way our government is right now going through this situation, it looks like they're not really interested. The government is not interested how much damage these problems are causing in our society. So my comment would be, what strategies can we take on as women to raise our voices and make ourselves heard right now, even through the crisis we're going through right now? The story you tell us is terrible. That's something I had mentioned before about the pedagogy of cruelty. You're talking a little bit about this. What reason do these professionals, these men, have to feel owners of the body of a person and to do with it what they're doing? So there's a lot to analyze, but what you and your colleagues are doing are the most important ones, and that is to organize around this subject, to think about it, to think about these notions, which take us also to make connections between what is within the patriarchy of our government, even in our homes, and how we fight against that, both within the micro space of the family, to the work environment, to what's happening with the state. So I feel that you, with your colleagues, are doing right to wonder yourself about where this cruelty comes from and to locate it, how it reproduces within a family, within a community, and within a state. And that is also going to help you to fight and to build a policy for life, not a policy for death. Thank you, Professor Pamela, for your comments, your answers. And now we want to continue inviting others. If anyone wants to, please open up their microphone to make a comment or to talk about a different experience. I see Regina. Regina would like to ask, but Anima was first. Anima? Anima, do you still want to participate? Otherwise, Regina. Regina, please go ahead. Oh, Anima,
Yes.
then.
No, Professor, I was agreeing to your point when you were sharing with Madeline. There are no questions, but I was just agreeing, yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And so, Regina, go ahead with your question. Regina, por favor, con tu pregunta.
Okay, thank you, Professor, for your very enlightening presentation. And I have some questions, actually. I hope it's fine. And So as we know that we are living in a patriarchal society and community, and here in my country in Indonesia, like feminism or feminist is seen as a negative thing because of the propaganda stigma that put, and also like a doctrine that put by the elders and by society. So it is very hard to even like having a discussion with women, because people will see that you're a feminist and it's a bad thing. Like, so the feminists they know is about helping men and something like that, even promoting not married things. So women here are really afraid of joining the feminism movement. So my question is, how we promote the feminism that you were mentioning earlier in your presentation, like multi-feminism and stuff. So how do we explain to the community, especially for the women, that it is not a bad thing. It is about the how we fight for our rights. So that's my first question. And then my second question is, so here in my community, there are so many oil palm plantations, and then this morning, actually, I just met community because there is a company and then a firm, a social sustainable firm called Ecotrop, which came to the village and asked them for discussion about the carbon trade, because like under the Roundtable Sustainable Oil Palm Plantation, they should have like every oil palm company should have like high value conservation area within their plantation. It is mandatory, and then so actually the community territory is not in their permit. However, because we plan to register their forest for the indigenous forest to the country state, and then the forest is a primary forest, so they would like to come to the community, so the community would agree to give their forest for high value conservation area. But as far as I know, if the forest become the high value conservation area, like the community won't be able to access to the forest, and it will be like evict women and children most, because most of the time like they will seek like vegetables and even food in the forest and stuff. So how do I like, because I would like to go to the community in a few days, so I would like your opinions on how I advocate the women to make the women movement, so they could like stating their opinion. So not only men can state their opinion, but also the women could also state their opinion in the meeting, because it's very important, because they are, I think, like the people who would like get the most impact of it. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. This is a very important question also about what, about a firm, Ecotrop, you said, right? And a state sort of coming together and trying to push notions of conservation that displace and marginalize, but mostly displace communities, and within those communities, especially women and children, because it is them who go and occupy and live in a living forest, right? And I don't know if talking to women, and I want to go to the first part of your comment, which is sort of like, how do we fight for our rights as women, and how do we fight against those firms that in cahoots with the states, those firms like Ecotrop in cahoots with the states come and sort of by sort of putting it in terms of carbon trade and all those more sort of I feel that there's a consultation process that the state should implement, right? And I think it is that, and people, indigenous women in Bolivia and other places have done it, like the protest or the claim that you need your rights to be respected, the rights of your body territory, your body as territory, your body as part of this larger community of humans and non-humans should be taken into consideration. And this free prior consultation and consent process should be implemented in this case. And your point about it is women and children mostly who are part of this living forest should give you the elements to talk to the women and say, this is our forest, not in terms of individual property, but in terms of collective property or collective ownership of the forest. And therefore pushing this idea that this is your what people are calling the commons. This is the collective process through which you make part of this living forest. And this is the collective process through which you hold and take care of the forest. And the government should sort of push away the attempts of Ecotrop or the firm that is trying to infringe and sort of like conservation is a fine idea, but if it comes along with this idea that you're going to commodify water, air, and whatever, it doesn't work for people who make up of part of the living forest. I don't know if I gave you an answer that could help, but yeah, you are part of a living forest, and you need to, and as women, and women who have children, you are organizing and for your rights to continue being part of that living forest. Regina?
Yes, thank you, Professor. And my first question is on how we promote the right feminism.
Or the feminism conundrum.
Yes.
It sort of has to do with the other question too, right? That the other person from Peru did. I think knowing this collective arenas in which indigenous women, you all sort of are part of this living forests or living Amazonian forest in that case, and living entities like made up of humans and non-humans, then women, as I've seen in everything that I've researched on and everything in the organizational process in which I've seen women sort of be part of, I saw all kinds of names for what they do. And sometimes people don't call what they do feminism. But they are doing feminism in terms of, yeah, really constructing a politics of care, a politics of life, right? A politics of affect in the way they care for the territory. And if you have that notion of territory, which is so wide and historically constructed, then I feel that you don't need to call yourself a feminist to to construct a politics of care, to take advantage of what ancestors have done already in territory about caring about the territory, about the environment, about nature, about Mother Earth, right? So there's people who call themselves, like Lorena Capnal, call themselves communitarian feminisms to differentiate their feminism. But there's other people who just don't see those feminist actions as feminist. I do because I want to affirm those multiple feminisms, but I also recognize that, a lot of women don't call what they do feminist, and that's okay, as long as we are defending those cuerpos territorios, those body territories, as soon as we're protecting each other interdependently against states and multinationals.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Resina, for your question. It's very important.
Muchas gracias, profesora. Nos quedan aproximadamente.
Thank you very much, Professor. We have about 6 or 7 minutes left to conclude this section. We hope that participants will still be willing to participate. This is a space that we'd like you to make the most of, particularly for this dialogue and to be able to share your experiences. That's right. I'd also like to excuse myself because I've just looked at the chat now and the interpreter was asking me to speak a little bit more slowly. And I usually do, as you've noticed right now, I'm speaking a bit slower, but when I was reading, I wasn't able to. And I hadn't seen the message. So apologies to the interpreters and to those people that are not English speaking and were not able to understand all of what was said. So I see a question from Bridani Pereira. Bridani, would we be able to see you? Yes. Hi, sister. Good morning. How are you? Good morning, sisters. Sister, I've been listening to all of the questions posed by my colleagues and my sisters, and since Wednesday's class, I've been thinking about this. We also spoke about development, and sometimes development goes hand in hand with capitalism. So in this situation in Peru, I've been looking at all of the protests that have taken place, and I've asked myself, for example, how do you see it that states, for example, don't open up these cases if we don't catch their attention by, I don't know, burning shops or closing highways? If people don't raise their voices in this manner, at least in Peru, they're never really considered. So we would always continue in the same situation. Now, this also goes with the fact that we should carry out peaceful marches and demand things based on laws, have protests that are just for speaking. But I've looked at all of this, and sometimes I think that, for example, this is all part of the story, like the video that you showed us. And in this last month, I've learned that you need to know the history. We've had to learn about when these settlements started in Latin America and in Europe, and this makes it difficult to forget. We therefore have to consider that as Indigenous people and Indigenous communities, we've always wanted to rise up and lift our voices so that our rights are respected. We see that this movement grows every time. There's more education for Indigenous people and greater capabilities for Indigenous people to make their thoughts and beliefs known as well as their experiences. But we continue in this cycle. This is what I've witnessed in Peru, at least. And I've realized we're in a cycle where we make complaints and we always lose. And at the end, we see that maybe those who are corrupt win, the powerful elite win. So I've been looking at everything that's been achieved so that we can make our rights respected. And we see that there's always been death and violence. Maybe there's been spaces burnt down and catastrophic things, terrible things have had to happen. But I feel that they have truly harmed our territories. We lost her. Hello? I'm sorry. The connection cut, but you're back. Yes. Well, that was what I wanted to say, sister. So I'm thinking about what is correct, whether it's correct to try to close highways or burn shops to get the state's attention. I don't know. I see that it's necessary, but at the same time, I see that then we're considered to be vandals, and that then gives them the right to violate our rights. So I haven't been able to reach a point where I really understand how to get benefits for us in the indigenous communities. I think that your question and this concern about this vicious cycle that you've explained is one that must be analyzed, and we need to strategize on this. How can we carry out this radical refusal? How can we maintain autonomy at the moment of thinking and acting while we construct within the country and the states something that will benefit the populations that we belong to? So I think this is a dilemma that has always existed, Brittany. This is an organizational challenge that relates to those grassroots organizations and indigenous organizations in this specific case, where they have to strategize and involve the states and then carry out things as they've tried to do in Bolivia and Ecuador. And if that doesn't work, then what does work in order to create this self-determination with dignity and create this self-determination in such a manner that they will respect the lives of people, as well as establish this self-determination with dignity and the clarity of the fact that what is desired is to progress and live well. They've just told me that the son of a friend of mine has been born and we were waiting for him. So I'd like to share with you all the happiness of having another being in this world with us. And I'd also like to come back to the reflection on how we can create these policies of life in order to propel policies of life where the where children will be born and be free and live well, creating conditions for what this Parayaku woman from the Amazon had said, so that they can experiment what will benefit the community most.
I know I haven't given you a real answer. It is a policy of death with this cycle, but I think that what we should highlight and emphasize is to have human beings being born, like today from my friend, this message from my friend, and to have this policy of life. Thank you, Brittany. I understand the frustration and the lack of respect by the states in this case, the Peruvian state. Thank you so much, Professor Pamela. Thank you for sharing with us all of your experience, the different cases from different countries. And we invite the participants to continue looking for other experiences, to do doing their research, things that will help us understand better the situations and improve our strategies. Thank you so much for your participation. We've reached the end of this session. And we thank Professor Elsa as well for sharing with us up until this point. And we're thankful that life allowed us to meet this way again. So thank you, Professor Pamela, and it's been a pleasure to share with both of you this space of dialogue and exchange of knowledge. Thank you so much, Professor Pamela. Thank you, Hortensia, and thank you, Elsa, and to FIMI in general, to all of you who always make such great effort to bring people together who are so interesting, young, right in the middle of the organizational process, and they're fighting for their rights. Thank you so much. And I take this opportunity to share with you just this acknowledgement. It will get to you electronically, and it's a recognition by the International Indigenous Women's Forum and the Indigenous Women's Global Leadership School. And we present this recognition to Professor Pamela Calla for participation and contribution in the capacity building of Indigenous women leaders from Africa, Asia, Latin America, North America, and the Pacific during the 10th edition of this program. And it is signed by FIMI's director. It will get to you electronically. And thank you so much again, Professor, for being with us. Thank you all. Thank you. So now I give the floor to Winnie, who will share with us important information. So let's pay attention, please, and take notes of what she's going to share with us. Winnie, the time is yours.
Thank you, Hortensia. And thank you, Professor Elsa and Professor Pamela, for coming to our session today. It's always a pleasure to have you with us. And so, sisters, just before we conclude today, I have a few housekeeping announcements I'd like to make. Today is the last class we're having just before the permanent forum, which begins on Monday. And so, because we didn't have direction on whether it will be virtual or not, but your advisors will share with you some links where you can follow the conversation online, both and on social media handles as well. So if you have a Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, you can follow conversations that are going to be happening at the permanent forum on those on the permanent forum handles. Your academic advisor will share with you the links, and then we'll also share with you the list of side events that are happening. Some of the side events are going to be hybrid, so you can register on the Zoom links that are available, and you'll be able to join some of those sessions that are going to be hybrid. So again, we'll share with you the list of the list of side events, some of which are going to be hybrid. We'll share with you the social media handles for the permanent forum, and you can follow some of the conversations there. And then we're also going to share with you the code for the UN Web TV. and the Indigenous Media Zone, where you can also follow conversations live during the permanent forum. So those are some ways in which you can participate during the forum in the next 2 weeks. So we will meet again in May, but then this doesn't mean that the work stops. In these 2 weeks, you'll be able to not just complete your advocacy plans, but also get in touch with your academic advisors so that they're able to walk you through or help you with your advocacy plans. Because when we come back after the permanent forum, as we had told you earlier, we're going to be presenting your advocacy plans in session. So please send your advocacy plans to your advisors if you haven't already, and make corrections or additions, or respond to whatever reflections your advisor will give you on your plan, so that by the time we're meeting again in 2 weeks, you have your plan ready and you're also ready to present it during that time. We will also share with you the schedule of how we're going to present the advocacy plans. So once that is finalized, the list is finalized, we're going to share that with you. Another thing is for the drafting committee of the global statement, please, you need to provide us with the topic of the global statement, so that we're able to apply to have the statement read during the permanent forum. As we've said, the permanent forum is next week, so we desperately need you to give us the topic by end of day today, so that we're able to see where in the agenda the topic falls, and then we'll be able to register and hopefully have someone represent us during the forum and read the statement on our behalf. And then after the permanent forum is done, after the 2 weeks, we will have a session where we will discuss your experiences. So you'll tell us about sessions that you are able to join from the sessions that will be hybrid. I don't know if any of you is going to be able to be there in person, but we will have a session where we discuss your experiences after the permanent forum. So in the next 2 weeks, just because we're not having sessions, please be proactive. Follow the conversations online. You can participate in those conversations, especially those that are happening on social media. You can participate there, and then we'll look forward to hearing not just your experiences of the permanent forum after the 2 weeks, but also now hear about your advocacy plans as well. So I wish you the best. I don't know if there's any other announcement, Joy or Hortensia, that you'd like to share with our sisters before we can close.
Ya no, Winnie. Podemos cerrar, por favor.
Nothing else, Winnie, we can close, please.
All right, thank you, Ote. All right, sisters, thank you so much, and thank you for being with us throughout these last few months until now. I wish you the best in the next 2 weeks, and I hope that you're able to have a fruitful, online or hybrid participation with the permanent forum. And just before we close, I don't know if Professor Elsa, if you have any last words for us before we close.
Just to wish our friends, our group, really a good experience at the forum, whether in person or remote. It is a special time, and I must tell you that the last time I went physically to the forum was 2019. So because of the pandemic and various other reasons. But the forum is there, and we need to support it from whatever angle we have, and whether we are personally there or whether we are remote. It's very important to continue to give to the forum, because our energy strengthens the forum. It is very, very true. And the forum is be a very different body if it didn't have the participation of Indigenous peoples. So I want to say this and maybe see you, let's say, see you again next week in person and the next 2 weeks, or at the time that we give the certificates after the permanent forum. So bye, everybody.
Thank you, Professor Elsa, and have a good weekend, everyone. And hopefully we'll see some of you virtually next week in some of the events at the Permanent Forum. All the best with your advocacy plans as well as you continue to develop and finalize them. And I look forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks. So goodbye, take care, everyone, and see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.